This podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, a leading international professional body advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. I'm your host, Felicity Dwyer. I'm a coach, facilitator, trainer, and author of Crafting Connection. In this series, I'm delighted to introduce you to coaches and educators who bring their expert and varied perspectives to the theme of working with the whole person in coaching. We'll explore psychological frameworks and practical approaches that can help you increase your impact as a coach. In this episode with Jennifer Garvey-Berger, we explore adult development theory. Jennifer clearly outlines the development journey and the stages of adult development. We look at how coaches might recognise development stages in themselves and their clients, whilst not using this theory carelessly or making assumptions. Jennifer shares a deep and meaningful understanding of the power of listening with empathy and presence, and how that can help people develop an understanding of the structure of their thinking, as well as the content. We also discuss leading in complexity and the importance of coaches developing themselves so that they can support leaders to support change in the world. Jennifer designs and teaches leadership programs, coaches senior leaders and their teams, and supports new ways of thinking about strategy and people. Jennifer builds on her deep theoretical knowledge to offer practical ways to make leaders' organisations more successful, their work more meaningful, and their lives more gratifying. Jennifer is also the author or co-author of 4 highly acclaimed books: Unleash Your Complexity Genius, Unlocking Leadership Mind Traps, Simple Habits for Complex Times, and Changing on the Job. So welcome, Jennifer.
It's lovely to be here, Felicity. Thank you.
Before we start our conversation, is there anything more you would like to say to introduce yourself to our listeners?
I'm just delighted to be here. I hope we have a great conversation.
Brilliant. This series is called Coaching the Whole Person, and something that I'm really interested in is stages of adult development and how coaches can bring that and combine it with other ways of understanding how individuals think and act. And my first question for you, for those who may not have come across this or may not know much about it, what is adult development theory?
I love this notion of combining all these different perspectives in to coach a whole person, which is, of course, what we're meant to do. And for me, adult development theory is an integral part of coaching a whole person. So this is the question of how is it that grown-ups grow over time in the way they make sense of the world and react to the world. And we know this for kids. It's very obvious to see how children have these very significant changes in their meaning making over time, from when they're little and they believe that Santa can get to everywhere on a single day, to when they're later and they're very skeptical about these ideas. They know that this is ridiculous. This is not a change just in what they know. It's a change in how they understand the world. The thing that surprises people until they think about it hard is that adults go through changes just as momentous as we develop towards what you might think of as wisdom over time.
So we don't just get to adulthood, whenever that might be, and stop learning and developing and growing. It keeps on. And I'm curious as to why this isn't talked about more. Maybe within coaching it is, but in organisations, when you work with leaders, is this something that people think and talk about a lot, or is it something that you often need to introduce and provide a little bit of education on as well as coaching?
I would say it's better known than it ever has been before.
Yeah.
And I would also say that it involves these changes that are somewhat invisible, about which we might have a feeling or a judgment. So people often have an intuitive sense of, oh, that's a really mature leader, or that leader is really wise, or that leader is immature. Like, we have these kind of big bucket descriptions. But what adult development theory gives us is a sense of what are the features of these different kind of eras in our lives, the different ways we make sense of the world, and then what are the ways we move from one of these eras to the next.
Thank you. So can provide a little bit of a theoretical underpinning, helping us to understand these stages, and that there is a pattern to these stages in the way adults develop, and also to help us perhaps identify this and understand how best to coach and work with people. Can you explain a little about adult development theory? I know you're steeped in the work of Robert Kegan and have worked with Robert Kegan. And I'd love for our listeners if you could talk through the key stages of adult development.
Sure. So the kind of earliest adult phases we might recognize as a kind of teenager phase. This is when my whole world is about me, and the perspective that I can take is my perspective. And I kind of use the system around me to get what I want. My thinking might be relatively black and white. And this is not because I'm a narcissist. It's not because I'm trying to make your life difficult. This is simply because I have not learned how to internalize the perspectives of others. I call that the self-sovereign mind, because I'm like the sovereign, the king or queen of my own dominion. But my own dominion is just one person. It's just me. And then over time, that becomes really difficult. It becomes really hard to figure out, in the complexity of the world around us, how does just me, without any real supports, what happens there? And we begin to kind of open our minds and breathe in the perspectives of others. And when we do that, we become what theorists talk about as socialized, right? Now we are fully immersed in a social surround, but my perspective actually becomes the collective perspective. So I breathe it in and I take it in as my own. There becomes no difference between my perspective and the perspective of the collective I belong to. That could be a professional collective, my organization. It could be all of the people in my profession, all the engineers or all the lawyers, or it could be more local, my community, my family, my religious institution, and my school, any of those things. But in any case, I'm breathing it in, and I'm kind of acting out of the more collective view about what's good, what a good life is. And then over time, for some, but not all adults, this idea, you begin to notice that your life is being written by somebody else, right? That as you're breathing it in, and you're kind of taking on these other views, you realize that's not you, that you are different. And at that point, some but not all adults pick up the pen and begin to write their own story. We talk about that as self-authored, because that's what you're doing, right? You're picking up the pen and writing your own story. And this is the kind of space where you own your own job, you own your decisions, you own your emotions. A lot of the self-help literature is kind of trying to drive us to that place.
Yeah.
And then there's, from far fewer adults, at some point, probably less than 5% of adults, they realize it's not really true that we write our own stories, right? Our stories are co-authored. We are both writing and written by our surround. And the collective nature of that means that the world itself is a playground of transformation. And we talk about this sort of meaning making as self-transforming, because we are constantly putting ourselves at risk for growing, for changing, for becoming wiser than we were before. So there's a little potted version.
Thank you. That was really, really clear. And I love some of the images there and the playground of transformation. And so thinking about it from a coaching perspective, And I guess many coaches, and certainly I've worked a lot in career development coaching, and I've often worked with people who are at that transition from socialized, and they've been embedded in, what their family might think is a good career, what has worked for them so far, the organizations they worked in, and are starting to think a little bit more about moving to that self-authored mind. So I really recognize that. And I'm really interested to hear from you about, how coaches might be able to use this. And I guess a starting question might be, how can coaches recognize perhaps what frame of mind people are coming from without falling into the trap of making assumptions? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, this is one of the hardest things about using adult development theory well. Because from my little 4-minute description or whatever it was, it's easy to start to pigeonhole people. Like, oh, I hear you talk about how these people matter to you, so you must be socialized. They influence your decision making, so you must be socialized. Actually, trying to understand the sense people are making is very tricky, and it requires new ways of listening, new things for us to attend to, because we're attending not to the content of somebody's thinking, but to the structure of somebody's thinking, not to what they talk about, but why they are the way they are, why, not to what I'm angry about, but to why that sort of category creates anger in me, and what my relationship is to my own anger. So it often takes a different kind of question asking and an entirely different way of listening for us to be increasingly confident that we understand the place that somebody's coming from. And then we need to know, as coaches, we have to check in with our clients. If we sort of stand here and make assessments without checking in with them, that's its own kind of problem. So you asked earlier, why don't more people know about adult development theory? I think because it's tricky. And I think because it puts quite a lot of responsibility on those of us who understand it to use this powerful tool wisely.
Yeah. And sounds to me as if it is not something to be taken up lightly as a model, but it also sounds to me, and from my much more limited experience of reading about the theory and attending seminars, I'm finding it fascinating and starting to question my own development. And so I suppose my next question that's emerging is something around, without encouraging anyone to jump into thinking, oh, this is something I'm going to immediately bolt on. What do you think would be helpful for a coach listening to this to ask themselves, really, if they wanted to start to explore perhaps their own development? Or is that making sense?
I love this question. Yeah, because the thing you point to, I think, is just exactly right. This theory is unbelievably powerful, right? In how we see ourselves and how we see our clients and how we're able to engage with the world and how we're able to coax our own development forward, the way we're able to support others to grow. And so while you don't want to treat it too simplistically, because it's a complex endeavor we're talking about, you also don't want to be afraid to begin. And so I think for me, one of the great revelations as I was beginning to learn about this set of theories about 30 years ago now, which I can't believe I'm saying that number, is the notion that we change in these fundamental ways and that we are always engaged in this shift. And that it's not just about like, oh, who are you? What's your personality? What's this thing or that thing that feels kind of more stable? That there are a set of changes that we are engaged in intentionally or unintentionally, and that we can play a much bigger role, a much bigger intentional role in who we are becoming than I think is obvious at first.
So there's a noticing there that we're changing, and a noticing that we can play a role in our own change, our own development. And I'm curious, is there a level of development at which that noticing and that understanding might be difficult to see? Or is there something coaches can do to open up awareness at any stage?
I mean, you have to have some purchase from yourself. You have to have some perch on which to view yourself to be able to have a sense of your changing over time. If you ask a child how they've changed over time, they might give you something quite concrete. Like I used to like mashed potatoes and now I like baked potatoes, like that's how I've changed over time. Or pink used to be my favorite color and now it's green. You have to actually have a sense of yourself inside your psychology. I used to be more afraid of conflict, and now I engage in conflict more easily. That takes a vantage point to look at our psychology and our feelings. So yes, there are places from which it's easier to be able to understand this developmental impulse. And it gets easier and easier and easier. But the thing that I love about the theory is that it introduces to us the idea that we could have that, right? It introduces to us the hope for the emergence of this conversation with ourselves. And I find that incredibly useful for me and my growth. The sense that there's this other thing that I could grow into has always been kind of a beacon guiding my way.
I love that. And I work in this field because I find it exciting, and it's like we're getting older, but getting older can be an exciting adventure. And I love that side of it. I'm also aware that sometimes I'm working with people and they might see the world differently. Because I do training, and I quite often talk about, the joy of learning, and hopefully that's something that comes across. But I also find this theory has helped me reflect a little bit on, am I meeting people where they're at? And that to me is something exciting about it as well, an awareness that I can get inside my own perspective on the world and think, I find it exciting, therefore you must find it exciting, and a reminder that it's always important to take those different perspectives.
Yeah, I think that this theory is really helpful at helping us take different perspectives.
Yeah.
Because our meaning making is generally invisible to us until we have something that illuminates it, like a set of theories like this. We take for granted that we are making meaning in a particular way all the time. And because that's invisible to us, we assume other people are doing the same thing just like us, right? Like this invisible thing. It's like, I assume you're breathing air right now because I'm breathing air right now. And so I have this assumption that we're both going to be breathing air the whole time we're talking here. And I'm not going to question that assumption. I don't check in with you. But I might have an assumption that you're embedded in a particular way of making sense of the world. And I don't even know that I have that assumption until adult development theory kind of illuminates it and then makes space for me to say, oh, the way I make sense of the world is one way. And there are all these different ways of kind of constructing what the world is and what its demands on us are. I need to get more curious about that.
And it strikes me, listening to you, that perhaps a really good starting point for coaches is to get curious about their own development and their own assumptions and their own perspectives, and how each individual coach has changed since the coach they were a year ago, or as a starting point.
I think we find ourselves very interesting. And so trying to make sense, I remember as I was first learning this theory, I had the sense I could look at my own reaction to something, which I was having, and sometimes in a very large way. I was starting a family and I was in graduate school, and there's a lot going on. I would be in the midst of this big reaction I was having to whatever it might have been. And I knew, I could be having a different reaction to the same event. right? A different reaction is possible here. I'm not having it. It's not possible for me in this moment, but in the future, maybe I would be less injured, less wounded by the conversation I've just been a part of, or maybe I would be less taken over by a particular reaction I'm having. It was this helpful check for me to see here's where I think I am right now. And wow, this other possibility is possible. I'd like to live my way into that other possibility.
And once you see it from that perspective of the observer or someone who is not at that moment completely fused with that perspective, there is the opportunity, the possibility, perhaps, is a possibility for a different reaction next time. And that's where the coaching space can be so valuable, isn't it? It provides that space for reflection and questions and perhaps looking back and opening up to possibilities. You know, is there another way that you might have reacted? And
what adult development theory can do is it can kind of shape our questions and our noticing. When we put on that hat, it can shape our questions and our noticing in helpful ways, so that it's not just fueled by our innate curiosity or, you know, what we had for breakfast that day or how we're thinking about something, but it's fueled by a more considered approach. But a lot of coaches talk about transformation, but do we really know what the form is that's changing, right? Here, this gives us a sense of what the form is, and therefore how to support somebody to change that form. Should the form of our thinking be smaller than the circumstances of our lives require?
And when you're thinking about supporting clients, you talked a little earlier about different ways of listening and the difference between listening for the content and listening for the structure or the meaning making. And I find that quite interesting. And I think what I'm trying to think about is when you're listening and you're aiming to listen with empathy and almost see something from the other person's perspective, I'm guessing there needs to be some part of you observing from the structure. Is that right, or have I missed something? Does that make sense?
Yeah, my experience is that actually listening for structure is insanely empathetic. So empathy doesn't need to be a thing that you also do. Mm-hmm. Because listening for structure is basically saying, I care so deeply about the way you make sense of the world that I am going to immerse myself in your sense making. And actually, one of the things I tend to teach coaches in the work I do with coaches is to really understand somebody's sense making, you have to not be engaged in trying to change it. Coaches are so often trying to add value. You know, this is what we're always trying to do. We're trying to be sure that we've created an insight or a change or something that our clients can point to as this was a good use of my time and you were worth the price I paid for you today. Actually, listening for the structure of somebody's sense making, you're not adding value. You're not changing anybody. You are being with somebody and trying as deeply as you can to understand the world from their perspectives. Why does the world work this way for you? And clients experience this as incredibly soothing, supportive, useful, because people don't listen this way. Nobody listens to them this way. And they feel accepted and seen. And then you are able to see something as a coach. You're able to see something, which is, it's kind of the X-ray vision of their thinking that people can't see. And so suddenly you have kind of a magic map to supporting them and helping them in some way that you didn't have before. But the first rule is to get that map, you can't be trying to help them.
That is really, really interesting. And I'm thinking about I've trained. I'm a time to think facilitator, and I take part in thinking partnerships, which are essentially all you are doing in a thinking partnership, and it's usually with someone who's trained in this. So there's no expectation that you will be helping somebody or doing anything other than offering that kind of listening that you have beautifully described. And it can be, incredibly powerful to be on the receiving end of that. And I understand that sometimes as well in a coaching context, you do feel you want to be helpful, or people's expectations are it will be structured in a certain way or focused on a certain outcome. So that's given me really something to think about, and almost reiterated the value of less is more. And certainly in my coaching career, that's the lesson I keep relearning, Jennifer. Less is more when it comes to what you do.
And I think also, I think very often, for me, I'll just speak for me. I don't know whether it's true for you or the fine folks who are listening. For me, when I'm focused on adding value, this is actually about me.
Yeah.
Right? This is me in my stuff, me in my ego, me in my potentially fear or shortage mentality. Right? This is not actually presence.
Yeah.
When I'm present, and listening for structure really helps me be present. When I'm present fully with all of the cells of my body, fully present with my client or any other human, I don't have to worry so much about me and am I adding value, and are we accomplishing the goals we set out in this particular thing? Those things emerge. Value emerges, goals emerge, insight emerges from a purer place when I am not focused on trying to force it to emerge.
So out of that wisdom and that, I guess where I'm at listening to you is knowing that the theory exists and that there's different perspectives and ways of seeing things, and it is valuable in itself. And in a coaching context, it's that really listening. It's that not making it about you. It's about trusting that the meaning and perhaps a greater ability to make sense will emerge by allowing it to. Coaches who, again, want to learn more about this, want to explore more about this, are there, aside from that depth of listening and presence, what else could you suggest that coaches do to help their clients develop and grow and become all they can be?
I think many of us, intuitively or through our training, understand that it's our job to help clients see the things that they were not seeing before. Right? This is one of the core features of our job. And as we listen, we illuminate for them these spaces that maybe they didn't know they had that assumption, or they didn't know that they had these limiting thoughts, or whatever it might be. And what adult development theory says is each of those moves is a move from that which we were subject to, that idea or frame that we were kind of seeing the world through unself-consciously, unknowingly, to being able to see it, to look at it, to make decisions about it, to consider it, to have it be an object of our reflection. And that subject-object move is the shape of transformation. It is the shape of adult growth. So I think all coaches are in the adult development business, right?
Yeah.
And I think that we're drawn to it and we love the adult development business. And at the same time, until you've studied these ideas, it's like anything. If you're acting out of piece together impulses, many of them fabulous, but the considered study of a particular idea is super useful. I had a body before I studied somatic ideas, and I had sensations, but I didn't really know what I was doing with them, right? And I certainly didn't know how to deal with them with a client. So the intentional studying of any of these whole person ideas just gives us more purchase on it, gives us a more unified whole to be able to move into what's useful in this moment with this person right now.
So inviting them to take something which may be a filter that they're seeing the world through, and to look at it and reflect on it as something in itself, something that's almost outside themselves or a little bit separate, just getting that separation. Yeah, I think it's something that we do, isn't it? But the thoughts of putting it within a framework, I think, is really quite helpful. Something that I'm thinking about as well is this idea, because we don't necessarily leave behind a stage, do we? We still we include and transcend a stage. So is it the case that, this is not a quick process? It's a process that happens slowly, and we expand and we integrate. I certainly feel for myself, I feel I make great progress in my development, and then I'll react in a way that I think, that was not a mature reaction. So I'd just love to know a little bit more about how this process works. I'm sure there isn't one answer on how long it might take people to move between stages, but is there a pattern to the process?
There are patterns. And of course, theories make sense of patterns, and individuals break those patterns all the time.
Yeah.
So, but the two things I hear you describing, one of them is this idea that we still contain these earlier ways of making sense of the world inside us. Any of us who has ever had something happen that we didn't like and keeps wishing that it wouldn't happen, even though it already happened, but we think, I just wish I hadn't said that. I'm just focused on not having said that. My life would be different if I hadn't said that. There's a little bit of the child's magical thinking in that. Like, if I can just focus on it long enough, the past will change, and maybe Santa will deliver me a present, right? And anytime we are focused on the direct consequences to us without being able to consider the consequences to somebody else, that's a little bit of the self-sovereign mind now popping up and kind of driving our car for a little while. So we grow like rings on a tree, as opposed to moving from city to city or country to country, leaving behind our former place. We carry it with us. And as you say, some situation or setting or context can toss us into some earlier version of ourselves. Just like some situation or setting or context can support us, hold us to be the biggest version of ourselves, and maybe even just a smidge past the biggest version of ourselves. I think this is another thing that people love being coached, because coaches often support people into their bigness.
Yeah.
They often help coax out the most competent, creative, empathetic, compassionate versions of our clients. We draw that out of them. That's a very enjoyable experience. Similarly, one of the reasons I think adult development is really helpful for leaders to know about is because that's also their job. Can I coax out the bigness of the people I lead, or am I pushing them back into some earlier box where they're actually smaller, less confident, less creative, less capable, because I was there? It's not the leadership we need right now.
Yeah. And given the complexity of the world we live in, what do you think are some of the particular reasons why this theory is important at the moment, why this understanding could be helpful, perhaps particularly in leadership coaching?
Bob Keegan, who was my mentor in graduate school and my PhD advisor, wrote a book in the 90s called In Over Our Heads, The Mental Demands of Modern Life. And his theory then, in the 90s, was that the world is so complex, it's pushing us so much harder than humans have been pushed before, that we need to grow in order to keep up with it. The 90s is now a long time ago, right?
Yeah.
And the demands of the 90s look kind of simple compared to the demands now. And so if you imagine that this was a phenomenon that was happening in the 90s, the idea that we might need to grow to intentionally evolve ourselves faster than humans have ever had to do that before is pretty evident, I think. And so then the question is, what helps intentional evolution? And I think one of the answers should be coaching, right? We need supports to carry us through. This original idea of a coach as a conveyance, right? Like a thing that carries you from place to place. Stage coach, a horse-drawn coach is the way that coaching comes into the world. And so those of us as coaches, as supports to take you, to carry you from where you are to where you want to be is this is our job, this is our reason. And in this very complex world, helping people handle the complexity of the world with more ease, more capability, maybe even more joy, less stress. This seems like quite a good activity.
Yeah. I'm not going to go too far down this route, but when you were talking, I was thinking about some of the political contexts, and we know coaching is quite widely recognised. The value of it in organisations and business, but it seems that people making big political decisions, are they getting that quality of coaching to support them to be their best? Because I'm not sure that they are.
I am also not sure that they are. And the context around them is also not supporting this kind of wisdom.
Yeah. Oh, I feel quite passionate, really. What you said just felt like it could make such a difference. And
the fact that coaches have a big role to play in creating the future that we all want to live into, this I don't have any doubt about. The question is, how are we going to support ourselves to be good company for the journey of the leaders that we support? Because the leaders that we support who are engaged in running companies, not-for-profits, political endeavors, they really need the help. They really need the help. Leadership is really, really not an intuitive, easy space these days. And giving leaders supports to help them make wiser moves, that's our job.
And in a minute, I'm going to ask people where they can find out more about you and the help you give coaches and leaders. But first of all, what thoughts do you have now about how coaches can help develop themselves, support themselves, so they can be those supports to leaders, so they can best play their part in the complex, ecosystem?
I think this is so important for us to remember. Most of the coaches I know, and I know many thousands of coaches, we got into this because we like to help other people. It's very easy for us to forget that we have to put on our own air masks first. And so thinking about our own development, thinking about our own well-being, thinking about our own capacity and how to nurture that capacity seems to me to be now our first responsibility. And then finding the pieces of the whole person coaching that are most engaging and exciting for each of us, and really delving into those. We have both the responsibility to care for ourselves, the responsibility to curate our knowledge in really helpful ways so that we can care for our clients, and then the responsibility to put those two things together so that our knowledge curation helps us care for ourselves and helps us support our clients in new ways. So this is what I would imagine.
Caring for ourselves, curating our knowledge, and allowing those two aspects to support each other. What does coaching the whole person mean for you, Jennifer? What excites you most?
I am such a believer in the idea that we have to lead from our whole person, right? Lead from the bottom of our feet to the top of our head. And leadership is such a full body sport these days. And so coaches need to be able to support that work. Coaches need to be able to help leaders engage with their knowledge, their thinking, their problem solving, also their emotional lives, also their physical lives. The more we study these different things that we thought were these different paths, our cognition, our emotions, our physical experience, the more we find out these are not different. These are the same. Our bodies enable our emotions, which enable our cognition, which enables our emotions, which enables our bodies. This is a full system. And as coaches, to be able to support people who are engaged in their own full system, we need to be engaged in understanding ours and theirs.
Yeah. So understanding our own bodies, our own emotions, our own cognition, and how they all relate, how they're all integrated and part of one connected system. Yeah. Thank you. Jennifer, if people want to find out more about you and your work and learn from you, where should they look?
Where should they look? It depends on how you like to engage. So I have a website, cultivatingleadership.com, and we have a ton of resources on that website. You can play around on it. We think these ideas are super important, so we give as much away for free as possible. So there's a lot to explore there. I have these books that I've written. If you're curious about these ideas, the one that goes most into adult development theory is called Changing on the Job. In there, I've tried to be really practical for coaches, as well as for those of you who really like geeking out on theory. There's some nice places to geek out on theory. The other books are get more practical for leaders. Yeah, and we have a series of programs for coaches. We teach a Growth Edge coaching qualification program, which teaches coaches to do exactly what we've been talking about here. Listen for the structure of their client's meaning making, share that thinking with their client, and use some of what we know about adult development to make coaching moves that really are transformational for people. So if you're really interested, join us for that. Those courses are enormously enjoyable. I'm told they're very useful, and you meet other great coaches along the way.
Fabulous. Thank you. And one last question before we end. If there was one message that you'd like to leave for coaches listening, one nugget about the value of adult development theory, what could that be?
I think my hope is that people just get really curious about it, that we understand that we are engaged in constructing the world all the time. And coaches generally know that, but they don't generally know that there are patterns to that construction and that those patterns change. The way we construct the world changes over time. And I mean, if you're a coach, that must be totally interesting, right? Like that idea is completely interesting to those of us who care about supporting people to grow and change. So I'm hoping that this conversation has pinged some people so that they'll begin what for me has been a lifelong study of these ideas that I never, ever get tired of thinking about.
Thank you, Jennifer. I've absolutely loved this conversation. It's left me even more curious and interested to know more. So thank you so much for joining for this episode. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Felicity.
Thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. For over 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organisations and society. To find out more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or visit our webpage at associationforcoaching.com. Explore our new digital learning hub and enjoy our extensive library of on-demand webinars, signature programs, member benefits, interviews, podcasts, and a portfolio of live events featuring thought leadership, tools, models, and the latest industry trends to help you develop and increase your coaching expertise.